In the early 1st century AD, the Roman polymath Pliny the Elder embarked on a grand tour of the empire. It was during these travels, much of which later formed the basis for his masterpiece of early scientific literature, Natural History, that he describes a curious incident on the western shores of the Dead Sea. Near to the oasis of En-Gedi, he describes coming into contact with a curious sect of extremely religious Jews living a simple, communal life out in the desert. Though he was there to investigate the natural world and the curious properties of the Great Salt Sea, this group clearly had an impact on him, later writing that they had existed for thousands of generations, possessed no money, and their priestly class refrained from marrying. He calls them the Essenes, and he places their dwellings just to the north of En-Gedi. There is nothing else there besides Qumran. We get other references to the Essenes from the writer Philo, a Jewish philosopher from Egypt and product of the Hellenizing age. But most important of all is the slightly later account given by the writer Flavius Josephus. Originally from a priestly family, Josephus fought as a general during the First Jewish Revolt, before surrendering early on and becoming a famous writer throughout the Roman Empire. Along with the invaluable information he provides on both the successful Maccabean revolt and the unsuccessful war against the Romans, Josephus gives us first-hand knowledge of the religious sects of his day: the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, apparently having spent some time living amongst the latter during his youth. During the 1st century AD, there wasn't just one standardized Judaism, not by any stretch of the imagination. Varying different creeds and schools of thought existed. The Samaritans, for example, are a much earlier offshoot of Judaism, splitting off by around 500 BC, before they were wiped out by the Hasmonean king, John Hyrcanus. The main dividing issue had been each having their own holy mountain to worship on, Mount Zion and Mount Gerizim. Another group mentioned by Philo were the Therapudii, an aesthetic group living in his native Egypt, and perhaps in Israel too. The most widely known groups, however, are the three discussed by Josephus. Firstly, we have the Sadducees, the main priestly group at the Temple of Jerusalem. Their mostly hereditary power seems to have stemmed from ancient aristocratic roots. As far as they were concerned, only priests at the temple could sacrifice. Therefore, they held all the religious power. They denied fringe theories such as the existence of angels and even the immortality of the soul, seen as an imperfection derived from Plato. The Pharisees, by comparison, wanted to democratize and transfer power from the temple to the household. They came up with other ways of worshipping. For example, reading the Torah and communal prayer. Finally, we have the Essenes, according to Josephus, probably only numbering a few hundred at any one time. They were most certainly a fringe group, desert separatists, directly opposed to both the Sadducees and the Pharisees. It's possible that there were further subdivisions within the three sects, like Catholicism, Orthodox Christianity, and Protestantism today. Most scholars today equate the Essenes with the Qumran community who wrote the scrolls. Therefore, it seems possible that they were the sons of light. And if they were, it makes the Dead Sea Scrolls all the more important, allowing us an insider's view of the thoughts and beliefs of a Jewish sect, not only contemporary with, but very similar to early Christianity. However, as we shall see, they did differ from Christianity on a number of key issues. But what of the archaeological site adjacent to the caves? A link to the scrolls and the Essenes had long been suspected, but could it be proved? In the early 1950s, just as the Dead Sea Caves were being discovered, excavations began on the settlement just next to them, Kebet Qumran. One of the earliest archaeologists to work at the site had initially dismissed the place as a Roman fort. When a jar was found that was almost identical to one found in Cave 1, however, a link was established. Roland Deveau, the French Dominican scholar who led the Catholic team that first excavated Qumran, eventually came to the conclusion it had been inhabited between 134 BC and 68 AD, with a brief hiatus after an earthquake in 31 BC, which may explain why the Roman puppet king Herod isn't mentioned in the scrolls. Apparently built on the ruins of an Iron Age fort, dating from the time of King Hezekiah or Josiah, it was during this brief period of self-rule under the Hasmoneans between 166 and 63 BC that communal life at Qumran seems to have begun. Life wasn't easy, and in order to get water supplies, an intricate series of aqueducts and cisterns had to be built. Nevertheless, Deveau and his team, all being Catholic priests, couldn't help but view the discoveries at least partially through a Christian lens, tending to liken the Qumran community to their own experiences as celibate monks, recording and creating written works in a cloistered community. Indeed, there are many similarities between the archaeological site and early Christian communities. However, as the scholar Lawrence Schiffman argues, there is always a danger of overly Christianizing the Qumran community. Though some see them as quasi-Christians or Christians before Jesus, the people of Qumran were not monks led by a bishop who performed baptisms. That way of life simply did not exist yet. They were a group of Jews who performed ritual purifications and copied texts in their library. Furthermore, women are mentioned in a variety of the Dead Sea Scrolls documents, and amongst the 1100 graves found at the Qumran cemetery, a significant number of female skeletons were found. Either the sources such as Philo and Pliny describing the Essenes weren't strictly accurate, or maybe, like later dualists like the Cathars, it was just the highest priests who were celibate. Nevertheless, there is a huge wealth of evidence at Qumran for some kind of a communal life. The site lacked verifiable private residences and had much evidence of inkwells and writing materials. Over 500 coins dating from the Seleucid and Hasmonean periods were found at the site in 3 large clay vessels, leading many to suggest that this was the earthly wealth given up by the members of the sect. We also have evidence of religious doctrine as described in the scrolls and in the contemporary accounts of the Essenes. The pots found at Qumran are of a unique type, being long and thin rather than the usual wide ones found in the Roman Empire. By having a lid instead of a cork, it was less work to open and didn't break the rules of the Sabbath. Also found at Qumran was evidence for the obsession with purity talked of by Josephus, with individual plates being found, very rare in the ancient world. But where did the community live? In the 1980s, archaeologist Joseph Petrarch explored another 17 caves around Qumran. Though he found no new documents, he did uncover significant archaeological data and evidence of habitation, all from the Second Temple period. Finally, between 1993 and 1996, another Israeli team looked again, once more investigating all of the caves in the region, looking to definitively link Qumran to the caves. After all those years of speculation, they found definitive proof. An ancient pathway between the caves and the settlement that can still be seen today. Occasional nails along the route, which had fallen from loose sandals, dated to the Second Temple period. Thus, the Qumran community may have lived in the caves themselves, as well as tents. The clay jars found in the Dead Sea caves seem to have been produced in a hurry. Many blisters and imperfections cover their surface. It may even be that those who made them sacrificed their own lives to protect the knowledge of the sect. For by 68 AD, the apocalyptic struggle they had waited for all those years had finally arrived.